You were formed in sacred silence. Hands of heaven shaped your frame, breathed alive by love eternal, long before you earned a name. Not a flaw, not a burden, not a role to keep you bound. You're the image of the Maker, where His beauty.
Have you ever felt like you're not enough? Like a past disqualifies you, your flaws define you, or your mistakes are too big to come back from? You are not alone. Some of the most well-known people in the Bible felt the same. Take Moses, a man with a violent past, who ran from his calling and said, "Who am I?" Or the woman at the well, shunned by her community, convinced she was too far gone to be seen. Or Peter, Jesus' closest disciple, who denied even knowing him and then thought his failure was final. Each of them wrestled with dignity. Each of them believed the lie that they weren't worthy. But here's what's beautiful. God didn't shame them. He restored them. He called them. He reminded them, your dignity doesn't come from what you've done, but from who I made you to be. So, today we are going to talk about this. What is dignity? Where does it come from? And what happens when the God who created you begins to speak into your identity? Because you may feel disqualified, but God still says, "You're mine." And maybe the best place to start is with a man who literally heard God's voice and still didn't believe he was enough. Moses stood in front of a burning bush, but the fire he felt wasn't just from the flames. It was the fire of being seen, because this was a man with a past, a man who had killed someone, a man who had run away from who he used to be, a man who thought his time had passed. And when God called his name, not criminal, not coward, but Moses, God called his name. Everything in him still hesitated. "Who am I?" he asked. And maybe you've asked that too. Moses, after years of hiding, not just in the wilderness, but inside himself, haunted by past, ashamed of who he used to be, and certain he could never be anything more. Because sometimes the most healing thing is not being fixed, but being known. And in that moment, Moses froze. He didn't feel ready. He didn't feel worthy. He didn't feel enough. He said, "Who am I?" And God's answer wasn't a pep talk. It wasn't a resume upgrade. It was this: "I will be with you." Because God wasn't calling the cleaned up version of Moses. He wasn't waiting for him to get it all together. He was calling the real Moses, the one who stuttered, the one who doubted, the one who ran, the one, despite it all, was still seen and chosen. And maybe, just maybe, that's the clearest picture of dignity. Not perfection, not performance, but presence. God's presence in the middle of our mess. His voice cutting through our shame. His grace rewriting our story. Moses didn't become enough. He discovered that God already was. And the same is true for you and for me, for all of us. You are not what you've done. You are not what you lack. You are who God calls you to be. And He still calls your name. But Moses wasn't the only one in the Bible. Throughout the Bible, we meet people who were crushed by shame, buried under labels, or convinced they didn't matter. People like you and me. People who thought their past disqualified them, or their pain defined them. And yet, time after time, God met them in that very place. Not once they had it all together, but exactly where they felt most unworthy. Take the woman at the well. She didn't come looking for Jesus, but grace came looking for her. And now, let's pause and sit with her story for a moment. A woman with no name, just a reputation, the Samaritan woman at the well. If you ever felt ashamed, if you ever walked through a crowd and felt invisible, if you ever believed your past disqualified you from being loved, this story is for you. She came to well at noon, not because she liked the heat, but because it was safer than the stairs. She had learned to live on the outside, unseen, avoided, reduced to whispers. 5 marriages behind her, a 6th man who didn't call her his, and a heart that probably felt more used than known. But then, Jesus, not just a stranger, not just a prophet, but a Messiah, sitting at her well, asking her for water. And more than that, offering her living water, not because she had her life together, but because she was thirsty. He told her everything she had ever done, not to shame her, but to show her, I see it all. I'm not leaving. And in that moment, something shifted. The woman who once walked alone now ran back to her village, her voice no longer weighed down by shame, but lit up by purpose. Come, see a man who told me everything I ever did and still saw me worthy of love. That's what Jesus does. He restores dignity without conditions. So maybe the question today isn't, am I worthy? Maybe the question is, will I let myself be seen, really seen, and still believe I'm loved? Because Jesus already does love you. Now, let's turn to a man we often remember for his boldness, but just as deeply for his breaking. Yes, we are talking about Peter, the one who swore with fire in his voice, even if everyone else falls away, I won't. And he meant it. But fear speaks louder in the dark. And when it came down to the moment, Peter's courage cracked, not once, not twice, 3 times. He denied even knowing Jesus. And then came the sound, a rooster crowing in the cold morning air, and Peter's heart shattering under the weight of his own failure. He wept bitterly, not just because he failed Jesus, but because he failed himself. So what did he do? He did what many of us do when shame sets in. He went back to what was familiar. Back to fishing, back to the silence, back to hiding. But Jesus, he didn't leave Peter in the wreckage. He came to him, not with lecture, not with I told you so, but with breakfast on shore, with warmth, with presence, and with a question that sounded more like restoration than interrogation. Peter, do you love me? Yes, Lord, you know I do. Then feed my sheep. 3 times, one for each denial, not to rub it in, but to write a new ending. That's what grace does. Jesus didn't erase Peter's past. He redeemed it. He didn't say you're disqualified. He said you're still called. And maybe that's the invitation for us today. Because dignity is in the absence of failure. It is what God does with it. It's the sound of a rooster that reminds you're not done yet. It's love that speaks louder than shame. And it's knowing this. Your lowest moment is not the end of your story. Not with Jesus. So maybe that's what we need to hear today. Not a motivational quote, not a try harder speech, but a reminder. A reminder that your dignity isn't lost. It's not shattered beyond repair. It's not something you have to earn or prove or win back. Because the same God who called Moses from the wilderness, the same Jesus who sat at the well, the same Savior who shared breakfast with Peter, is still calling names today. And maybe He's calling yours. Not the version of you that has it all together. Not the version that wears a mask to fit in, but you as you are. The one who doubts, the one who's tired, the one who wonders if they've messed up too many times. And here's what he says. You are mine. I see you. I'm not leaving. That's what Jesus offers. Not just forgiveness, but restoration. Not just second chances, but a new story. So the question is no longer, am I worthy? Because He's already answered that. Now the question is, will you believe in Him? Will you receive the love that says, you are enough because I am with you. You are forgiven because I took your shame. You are called because I created you on purpose. Today, Jesus stands at your well. He waits on your shore. He whispers your name in the wilderness. And all He asks is this: come, let me restore you. Let me rewrite what shame tried to erase. Let me show you who you truly are. Because with Jesus, your story's not over. It's just beginning. Thank you for watching and God bless you.